Fike was an artist that seemingly came out of nowhere, one of those kind of artists that just seemed to blow up really quickly, one of those overnight type sensations. Perhaps he was popular elsewhere before Brockhampton shared that video and started to like share his music and stuff. I don't really know, but he wasn't really much of a talked about name up until then. And then the song 3 Nights, which was a huge single last year, really propelled him into the mainstream. I always thought it was a solid track, never really was massively in love with it, but it was fine for what it is. If it comes on like the radio or something, I'm not going to get mad, I'll be happy to listen to it, but I was never really fully excited to see where this guy was going to go. And then this album came out just this past week, thought I'd check it out, and honestly it's a pretty stinking debut, I must say. Something that strikes me about this album, me personally, is that it doesn't really have much of an identity, doesn't really have much of a distinctness to it. There were points on the album where I was definitely looking at other artists and how I was thinking he's influenced by plenty of different types of people, and that's not even the issue with the album, because obviously you can show your influences and make them your own, but like the sound of this album just is very like blasé. There's just nothing really to hold on to. There's nothing really interesting about Dominic as a performer. I just think for a debut album, you've really got to find a way to make some kind of impact, some kind of splash, put your name out there and show us who you are. And Dominic doesn't really do that. There are points where I'm just questioning his vocal performances. I'm just questioning why he would like modulate his voice in the way he does, questioning the lyrics. Far too much am I spent listening to this album questioning the lyrics. It's funny because the first 2 tracks are fine for what they are. Double Negative, a pretty solid track, pretty basic in terms of its structure, and I quite like the drum pattern on this one. I think the chorus is pretty catchy. Dominic is just giving us something that's pretty easy to listen to. It's not the most striking song, but it's pretty solid compared to the rest of this album. But it doesn't take very long before I'm just wondering what exactly he's trying to go for. On a track like Cancel Me, which is like the 3rd track in, I'm just really baffled by the lyrical choices here. I sort of understand what he's trying to say, but the way he's wording it, I think is really bad. It's this idea that he'd rather be cancelled, he'd rather have the internet, you know, throw him aside than become famous and live the high glamour fame life. He'd rather, you know, be cancelled than be on Jimmy Kimmel and shit like that. But I just think like his wording of it all just comes across very defensive, a bit unnecessary as well. Like the entire lyrical arc of this track just seems very unnecessary. He's just not wording the lyrics throughout this track in a particularly great way for me. And the more important thing really is that the tune itself isn't really that good. It's not a particularly catchy song. I'm just not really compelled by anything that's going on here. Then you've got tracks like 10 Times Stronger, and there's a few like this on the album where it's just so short and undercooked that you just gotta wonder why it even made the album. You could have cut this out. It does nothing to add to it. There's like these la la la's towards the end, and it's just the most derivative sounding thing. Like there is just nothing to this song. Like it's barely, you can barely even call it an interlude, because sometimes interludes at least segue into the next track in an interesting way, but like this is just like barely even a thing. I mentioned as well where he occasionally like modulates his vocals in a very Brockhampton type fashion. Brockhampton do get name dropped on the track Cancel Me as well, which I thought was a bit silly really. But the vocal modulation that goes on often really rubs me the wrong way. I think usually artists don't really captivate me with the way that they do it, and you could probably just sing in a better way than, you know, splashing all this crap onto your voice that makes it sound robotic and unhuman. And it's kind of the same here. These tracks on this album don't really sound particularly nice. Superstar Shit to me is really bad. Like I can't sit through these vocals. It really sounds ugly as hell. Good Game is completely different though with the vocals, as this track sounds quite Mac Miller in the way that he sounds very drowsy and very laid back and very chill, sort of like druggy in the way that he's singing. Again, not really feeling this at all, just a really lazy sounding vocal performance that really provides little to no personality. That's the other thing with this album. Like, I'm just struggling to find something with Dominic that's personality driven. Like, I just don't know. I think everything here is just a miss. Chicken Tenders, I think, is awful lyrically, like really bad. Just not sure what he's trying to go for with the chorus here, just depicting this story with a girl, and like at the end he says something about his back. I just don't even care. Vampires though, bro, vampires, just talking about how they're at a party and the wine, the red wine isn't red wine because vampires, it's actually blood. I did think Politics and Violence was going to be a more interesting track initially. I thought the lyrics seemed quite interesting, you know, with the way he's talking about Hollywood, and then it just goes nowhere, and then the second half of the song is just not really relevant to anything really. I just don't get anything out of this. That's kind of the album really. Most of it just doesn't seem like it's catered to me at all. And that's the other thing as well, like the music on this album is just so whatever. Like, it just has really little to it. I can't describe it because it just isn't interesting enough for me to really point to anything and go, oh yeah, this is interesting, because it just isn't. Reminds me a lot of listening to something like Rex Orange County, where I'm just sort of in this position where I can't quite pinpoint what type of artists they are. They're these like indie type figures that aren't really indie because they get really popular and they have this sort of vibe to them, and I just never latch on to anything. I never find any of the things that these types of artists do interesting at all. So yeah, this just is not for me. So 4 out of 10 from me, probably not surprising, but if you like this, definitely let me know in the comments. Tell me what it is about this guy that you really like as well, if you're a fan, because I just don't really see it. But perhaps if someone could sort of show me the way, maybe I could at least look at this album in a different way and maybe think, oh, you know what, I kind of see that, because of the currently right now, I don't see it. Thank you for watching my review. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully you have a good day. Subscribe if you haven't already. Goodbye.